Good evening, everyone.
Kavod Rav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay. So it says over in the Bet Yosef, מצאתי כתוב שניים שאכלו בקן זווית ואחד אכל בקן זווית. So we have two people, right? Ate in the corner and one ate in another corner. אבל לא בסדר אחד, right? But they were not like together kind of, So it says, right? שאלתי הלכה למעשה למורי. So I asked my rabbi, what's הלכה? אם יש להם לזמן יחד, should they do זימון or not, right? אם לא, if not. והשיב לי, so he says he answered me, כן, כי מאחר שלא נתכוונו להסב יחד, אינן חייבים לזימון. So since they weren't really, intending to eat together, so they're not really obligated לזימון. ורשות בידם לחלק, so therefore they can, separate. וגם אם רצונם, even if their will is, יכולים לזמן, but if they want to, they could, he says. ושאלתי לו, איזה מהם עדיף? So he asked him, he says, which one is better, right? To do or not to do, right? והשיב, לא טוב שיזמנו משום ברוב עמדת המלך. Look what he says, wow. So he says that it's good that they should do zimun. Why? Because, serving God in a multitude is better. bar Abraham. So this is the Riva, right? Tshuva of the Riva. Okay, whatever. So that's Bet Yosef, and let's see what else we got. Okay, so we'll finish off the Shulchan Aruch, whatever we didn't do yesterday, and then we'll continue from there. Right, so exactly, we did this last night, but I want to just reiterate this because now we did the Bet Yosef that is relevant for this. We said in the Ramah, if you remember, that, even though they're able to do it separately, but doing it better is better. So doing it together is better, meaning to say that to do zimun. Right? So that this Ramah was coming from that Bet Yosef that we just read. That's the source for it. So, so that is the halacha, right? That it is better to do together. He says, and even though we saw in the Mishnah Brura um, yesterday that he was a little bit arguing with this, but the truth is, it's not really such an argument at all because the Mishnah Brura was saying, right, that if you're saying the name of God, so then it may be better not to do it at all. But here we're talking about three people, when there is no name of God. So it's not really contradiction one to the other. But the truth is, there is a little bit of contradiction there. But according to the psak that we just saw now, apparently, right, it's better to do together. So if that's the case, that's what they should do, if they want to do together, they could, and it's better. Okay, great. So we have another Shulchan Aruch, one more. Um, let's see. Maybe we already did it. Maybe we finished it already. Yeah, we're pretty much done. So we'll go on to Dalid. Okay. So it says here, אפילו לא אכל כזית ביחד אינם רשאים לחלק. So he says, even if they ate kazait together, right, they're not, I'm sorry, if they did not eat a kazait together, they're still not allowed to separate, in other words, they should still do the zimun. The Tanan, as we learn in the Mishnah, שלושה שאכלו כאחד אינם רשאים לחלק. Because it says in the Mishnah that three that ate together, they're not allowed to separate. ופריך מאי כמשמען, so Gemara asks over there, what are you teaching me? Tanina Chadad Mazino. We already learned this one time. All right. So Gemara answers, Kamashmanan, let me to teach you this. Kihad Amar Rabbi Abba Amar Shmuel, like this rabbi said, Shlosha sheyashvu le'echol ke'echad v'adayin lo achlu. If three people, right, sat to eat together and adayin they didn't eat yet, enam rashem lechalek, they're still not allowed to separate. כתב הראש פירש שישבו לאכול וברכו ברכה ברכת המוציא. What does that mean? That they sat down to eat together and they did המוציא ועדיין לא אכלו שיעור ברכה, but they didn't eat enough yet to do ברכת המזון. אינם רשאים לחלק, they're still not allowed to separate. וחומרה הוא שהחמירו החכמים בדבר. So he says the rabbis were very stringent about this. וממשנה יתרה שמינן לה, so he says we learn this from this Mishnah or whatever that we learned, which was like superfluous, whatever. The katane shlosha she'achlu ke'echad, because it says three people that ate like together as one. Umparesh la she'itchilu de'echol b'Yerushalmi, that they started to eat, and it's in Yerushalmi Grasina Beresh Pirkim. It says there that hacha atamer chayavim b'zimun. Here you're saying that they're liable to do zimun, they're obligated. And here you're telling me that they're not allowed to separate. So what is it coming to teach you, right? The superfluous Mishnah. It's the same thing as the beginning, right? Same idea. Shmuel says one is talking about the beginning and one is talking about the end. What does that mean, the beginning? What is the end? Right? One says that they, decided to eat together. So that's the beginning. And if they ate a kazait, that's the end. אחד אמר, אכלו כזית, one says, another one says, they ate a כזית, זהו בתחילה, that's the beginning, גמרו לאכול, if they finished to eat, זהו בסוף, that's the end of it. והד דפרישית אחא, שברכו ברכת המוציא, and that which it says over here, that they blessed המוציא, ועדיין לא אכלו שיעור ברכה, but they didn't eat enough yet to bless, היינו כמאן דאמר, that's according to the one who says, אכלו, זה בתחילה, זהו בתחילה, that if they ate, right, that's the beginning, זהו בתחילה, וכזית, and the nekad לאו דווקא, and when he says כזית, it's not exacting, it's not exactly, אלא להפוקי ממאן דאמר, it's coming to exclude the one who says, נתנו דעתם לאכול, if they decide to eat, זהו בתחילה, that's the beginning, the משמע that implies, רק שגמרו בדעתם, that they decided to eat, אף על פי שלא ברכו ברכת המוציא, and even though they didn't bless המוציא yet, והבה מפרישנה שישבו לאכול, and if I would explain, it means that they sat down to eat, אף על פי שלא ברכו ברכת המוציא, even though they didn't do המוציא yet, אז הווה כמאן דאמר, then it will be like the one who says, נתנו דעתם לאכול, that they decided to eat, זהו בתחילה, that's the beginning, אבל לא מסתבר לפרוש שכן, but it says it doesn't make sense to explain like that. The chumra yetera is because it's strong stringency, excessive stringency. Zot, at kind of the end of it. Be'afal pishadat Rabbeinu Yonah says even though Rabbeinu Yonah holds notel lifsok the chivan, it seems to paskin that shegamu b'datan lechol once they decide to eat biachad together chalem b'chovat zimun. So they're already obligated to do zimun at that point, so they can't separate anymore. ואינם רשאים לחלק, and they're not allowed to divide up. לא חשש רבנו להזכיר סברה זו. So he says Rabbeinu, right, was not particular to mention this opinion. מאחר שכתב הראש, since the Rosh said שהיא חומרה יתרה, since it's a excessive stringency, וגם הרשב"א כתב בשם רבנו היי, the Rashba also says in the name of this rabbi, שכיוון שישבו לאכול ביחד, since they sat to eat together, אף על פי שלא התחילו בסעודה, even though they didn't start the סעודה yet, כיוון שנזקקו לאכילת זימון, but since they needed now to eat for zimun, enam rashayim lechalek. They're not allowed to divide anymore. Separate. They're not allowed to separate anymore. וכן כתב רבא, this is what it says in רבא, ומיהו משמע שהתחילו קצת לאכול. But it says, implies that they started to eat a little bit, ואחר כך חזרו פניהם זה לכאן וזה לכאן. And then they kind of like turn around. וגמרו סעודתן, they finished their meal, אבל אם לא התחילו כלל, but if they didn't start at all, לא, they're not so. בירושלמי דריש פירקין נחלקו, in ירושלמי darshans that נחלקו, if they divided, הם צריכים התחלה בכזית, או אפילו בפחות בכזית. Do they need to eat a כזית or not? Or even less? I can actually understand the end of it. ובעל הבית עם בני ביתו, so he says the host with his family, the head of the household, היה נראה לומר, דאף על פי, it seems to say that, seems to be reasonable to say, דאף על פי שלא התחילו, even though they didn't start yet לאכול, to start to eat, אינם רשאים לחלק, they're not allowed to divide, אלא שהראש כתב בפרק הרבה פסחים, but the Rosh said, as we already mentioned, בשם רבינו יחיאל, שרשאים לחלק, that they could divide if they want to. Okay, interesting. That's the end of it. That's Daled. So we'll see Shulchan Aruch. It was a little bit confusing, but let's see if Shulchan Aruch straightens it out. Right, so this is what he says. אפילו לא הוקבעו מתחילה כולם לאכול יחד. Even though, right, although in the beginning, they didn't really plan to eat together. I'm sorry, not this one, it's the next one. So אם היו רוכבים ואמרו, right, let's say they were riding on on animals, whatever, and they said, nochal, and they said, you know what, let's eat. אף על פי שכל אחד אוכל מכיכרו, even though each one has his own food, right, his own loaf of bread, whatever, ולא ירדו מהבהמות, and they didn't really come down off the animals, they're still riding, right? מצטרפים, כיוון שעמדו במקום אחד. So he says they do combine, nevertheless, right? Why is that? Because they all stopped in one place there. And even though each one is on his little animal there, right? Still, they can do zimun together. אבל אימא, היו הולכים ואוכלים, but if they were just like walking and eating, no, then it's not so. So I guess the difference is because they didn't stop, they just kept on walking. Here they stopped. ואם היו אוכלים בשדה מפוזרים ומפורדים, what about if they're eating in the field, right? And they're like kind of like all scattered. אף על פי שאוכלים כולם בשד אחד, even though they're eating all together in one time, בכיכר אחד, and there's one loaf for everybody, כיוון שלא קבעו מקום לאכול, but since they didn't fix like a place to eat, אינם מצטרפים, they don't combine. So that's similar to what we said before, that it's like if they're eating on one table, then it does combine. But if not, not so. Okay, so אם היו אוכלים בשדה מפוזרים ומפוזרים, אף על פי שאוכלים right. And then he says, what else does he say here? So it really depends on how they started the meal. As we said. So says Ramah here, Aga, minhag שלא לזמן בבית עובד כוכבים. Wow, look what he says, interesting. So he says, if you're in the house of a goy, the custom is not to do zimun. ונראה לי שהטעם משום דלא יוכלו לקבוע עצמן בבית עובד כוכבים. So he says probably the reason is because they're not really like, kind of like stable there. I don't know. In other words, they're not going to stay there or whatever. They're not really. משום יראת העובד כוכבים והווה כאילו אכלה בלא קבע, right? So they're afraid of the goy, So it's like they're not really together as a group. So that's I guess you could say, right, that's when you're talking about in Europe, right? Because over there was a lot of hostility, between the Jews and the goyim, there was a lot of hatred there. So because of that, right, when you were in the house of a goy, like you felt nervous, like you didn't feel comfortable at all. That's what he's trying to say. But Americans, they're very mild-mannered people. You know how it is, right? Americans, don't they're not the same. They're chilled out. Americans are chilled out people. So if that's the case, right, it may be a little bit different nowadays. But anyway, really, I mean, it's just, it's like you have to make this observation. It's very clear that, the situation the Jews had in Europe was extremely difficult, with the Goyim. They had a very hard time over there. There was danger, there was hostility, there was killings, there was all kinds of stuff. It was totally crazy there. So, you know, not the same thing at all. I remember when I was a kid, I was growing up here in Queens, different neighborhood. Just came from like from Georgia, from wherever where I lived, and so I met some like non-Jewish friends, when I was a kid, And they were so friendly, like they would invite me into their house, and like they would come to my house, we were like so close, like there was never any feeling like that, of hostility or anything like that. It's a totally different thing today, it's not the same thing at all. So what can I tell you? Okay, let's move on. So what else does he say here? The Ramah. ועוד יש לחוש לסכנה אם ישנו בנוסח הברכה, וואו, ולא יאמרו הרחמן יברך ברוך השם בעל הבית הזה, ולכן מתחילה לא קבעו עצמן. So he says, there's some danger there involved, he says, when you're in the house of the goy. Why is that? Because of the text of the blessing here, he says. So what does that mean? They're not going to bless, the balabait, the host, whatever. So he says, therefore, they didn't really decree the rabbis to make zimun in the house of a goy. Okay, I didn't say it right. What he means to say is that uh, they're not comfortable as a group. When they're in the house of a goy. That's what he means to say. Okay, לכן אין לשנות המנהג. So he says, therefore, don't change the custom. אף אף אם לא היו טעמים אלו מספיקים. So he says, look what he says, right? Even if these reasons were not really sufficient. מכל מקום, מאחר כבר נהגו כך, הווה כאילו לא קבעו עצמם ביחד. So he says, but since the custom is like that, it's considered to be like, at the outset, there was no intention, to do this. Wow. So that's very, very strong language here from the Rama. Okay, very interesting. I don't think, honestly, I don't think any, today, really, this is not the situation at all. It's totally different, especially in America, as I said, totally different situation. Anyway, it's interesting. So we'll go to hey. So it says here in hey, ותו משנינן אחד פריך עמי, כמשמען תנינא. Yeah, we should look in the tour. The language is not so clear. You can see the whole thing. Yeah, I'm gonna read this tour. There's some things here that Maybe perhaps we didn't catch here, so I'm just going to read through it here. So it says like this in the Torah. Afilu lo achlu kazait biyachad. Even though they didn't eat a kazait together, right? Enan Rashaim lechalek. They're still not allowed to separate, right? As we said, the Tanan gimel sheachlu keechad, because it says that if three ate together, right, they have to do zimun. Enan Rashaim lechalek. They're not allowed to separate. Uparich man kamashmanan. So right, asks, what are you teaching me here? Tanina chadazim. We already learned this one time. Shlosha sheachlu keechad chayvim lezamen. The three that ate together are obligated to do zimun. Kamashmanan kiadam Rabbi Abba Amar Shmuel. Yeah, we already read this. We read this already in the Beit Yosef. Gimel sheyashvu lechol berchu berachat hamotzi. The three that sat together, right, and they made hamotzi and rashen lechalek. They're not allowed to separate. Perush sheyashvu lechol uberchu birkat hamotzi v'adayin lo achlu shiur bracha. That they made hamotzi, but they didn't still eat the time of the size of the blessing, right? In other words, to do birkat hamazon, and rashain, which is a kazait, and rashain lechalek. They're not allowed to separate. Rabbi Alfas gores kamashmanan gimel sheyashvu sheyachol. But the Rif, his text is like this: three that is set to eat. Even though each one is eating from his loaf, they're not allowed to divide. So therefore, he says you have to be right stringent, like both texts. Even if each one is eating from his own loaf, and even though he didn't eat yet kazait of bread, they can still separate. But two mishaninan, and also we learn regarding that when she objected. Umay kamashmanan tanina kamashmanan. What is it coming to teach you? Comes to teach you kihad yam rabuna gimel shabal megimel chavrot. That if three people came from three different groups, and Hashem lechalek, they're not allowed to separate. Amrav chazda vehu shabal megimel chavrot. That's it says Rabbi. This Rabbi says that's only if they came from three groups. Shel gimel gimel. Each one has had three. Bnei Adam, three people. Amar Rabba lo amaran ela de lo azmun alayu beduchtayu. That's he says that we only said that when they didn't do zimun in their place already with them. But azmun alayu, but if they did zimun with the other group, beduchtayu in their place, parach zimun minayu. So then they lost the mitzvah of zimun. Right? Pirash gimel shebao begimel chavrot shel gimel gimel bnei Adam ונתחברו אלו gimel. Okay, so I think we're pretty much caught up with the tour here. That's really going ahead of us. So let me see what else we got here. I'll read this too, just for sake of reviewing this whole thing, so we understand a little bit better. He says over here, right? He brings this machloket. Katav Ri says the Ri Zal Ha Titan Gimel Shachlu Enon Rashayin Lechalek. We already said, right, that three people that ate together, they're not allowed to divide, to separate. Dafka Keshe Kavu Atzman Biyachad. That's only if they plan to eat together as a group, right? We said that yesterday. בתחילה, ברכת המוציא, when they did hamotzi, they did beseva with reclining, udidan b'shiva, and by now we don't recline, we just sit, right? So it's the same thing. אז אינן השם מחלק, so then they cannot divide. אבל אם קבעו עצמם ביחד ברכת המוציא, but if they just did hamotzi together, right? אלא אחר כך נקבעו באכילה ביחד רשאים לחלק. But then, afterwards, so right again, but if they didn't make intention, they didn't have intention to do hamotzi together, right? Just happened to be they got together, by chance. So then they can separate according to the Ri. So, but the Rosh seems to argue with this, right? And says, seems to me like the ones who explain, even though they didn't do hamotzi together, Ella אחר כך נקבעו, rather just afterwards, right, they got together and they ate together, right, באכילה ביחד, eating together, נקבעו זימון, so they do have a זימון there like that. ואינם רשאים לחלק, they're not allowed to divide up into pieces. Right, so that's pretty much it, and we paskin like the second opinion, which is the Rosh, who says that even though you didn't start together, you didn't have plan to eat together at all, right? But nevertheless, if you did eat together, and now you're at the end of your meal, you got three people, just finished a meal, right? So you should make zimun. You should not separate. That's halacha. So we said that yesterday. Just to give you an example of this, right? I remember when I was in Israel, we learned in the kollel there. So, we had like a dining room, something like that, kitchen dining room thing. So, we would just like, get together over there by chance sometimes, or let's say it was a lunch hour. So people were like, just gathering in there and eating, but they didn't really plan to eat together. Just, everybody just comes in and eats, right? So what I'm saying is that, nevertheless, since they ate together, they're in one room, pretty much, right? And they're sitting on one table, more or less, right? So therefore, in a case like that, they really should make zimun, even though they didn't really start together as a group. But the bottom line is that they ate together, in the cafeteria, whatever you want to call it, right? So they should make zimun like that. But then we said, right, that on the other hand, if each one is eating like in a separate corner of like one room, they're not really on the same table, perhaps, right, per se. So there, as we said, right, it's like optional. If they want, they could do separate. If they want, they could do together. And we said, right, that we paskin that better to do together. That's what we said, why not? Even though they didn't really eat together. They were like in different parts of the room, but they're in one room. So there, it's like optional. Why not? You should do it. It's better to do it. It's a mitzvah to do zimun. Okay, great. So, yeah, now we're caught up with the tour. So let's see what we got in the Bet Yosef here. It says Bet Yosef, שם אין עמי כי עד רב הונא דאמר רב הונא שלושה בני אדם שבאו משלוש חבורות. But as we just mentioned, right, that if we have three people, they came from three separate groups. Each one came from a group of three. אינם רשאים לחלק, they're not allowed to separate. אמר רב חסדא והוא שבאו משלוש חבורות, that's when they're coming from three groups of three. וכתבו התוספות, אבל הזמון עליו בדוכתיו. But if they already made zimun in their place, in other words, the original group made the zimun, פירוש שאכל כל אחד מהשלושה והפסיק לשניים, שהיו מסובים עמו, עד הזן כדאיתא לאל פרח קבוות זימון עליהם. Right? So he's telling you like this, right? That if they already made zimun in the first group, so now, right, even though they went to a different group and made like a group of three there, they're not obligated to do it anymore. If they already did it, that's it. They're done. You don't do zimun twice. Once is enough. Okay, great. So let's see what else we got here. So it says, כלומר, בטורין מן הזימון, רשאי לאתר לחלק רבנו כתב כפירוש זה. So he says, right, the tour wrote like this explanation. ואפילו לא אכלו אלא השלושה ביחד משנתחברו. So it says, even though these three ate together, just these three, once they got together, right, Ken Katav Rashi, that's what Rashi says, Sham, Nafi Perusho, according to his explanation. But Rabbeinu Afal Pi Shelo Katav Kan, and even though Rabbeinu, the tour, right, didn't write here Elal Perush Tosfot, he only wrote the the opinion of Tosfot. כתב דבר זה לפי שהוא סובר שבעניין זה, he wrote this because he holds that when it comes to this issue, אין מחלוקת בין רש"י ותוספות. There's really no dispute between Rashi and Tosfot. ויש לדקדק אם כן, it says there we should deduce, right? If so, היח מצטרפים, then how they combine, שהרי ברכת הזימון ליטא אל על פת. But we already said, right, that zimun is only on bread. והוא טעון ברכה לאחריו, and it does require blessing afterwards. במקומו, in his place, וצריך לומר שבשאכלו שלוש חבורות בבית אחד. So you have to say, right, that three groups ate in one house, עסקינן, שחבורה זו אכלת בזווית זו, one group ate in one corner, וזה בזווית זו, and then a different group in a different corner, דאשת אף על פי שאחר כך, and now he says, even though that afterwards, מתקבצים בזווית אחת, they're now gathering into one corner, let them, but we don't care, the מפינה לפינה לא הווה שינוי, because going from one corner to another doesn't really change anything, right? So therefore they're still in the same domain, that's what he's saying, so therefore we do want to do zimun. And I mean, alternative says, אחי כמר, שכיוון שבאו אלו השלושה להצטרף זה לזה, since these three came, right, to combine one with the other, ולזמן and to make zimun, אף על פי שלא יסיבו ביחד, even though they didn't really sit together as a group, ולא אכלו ביחד, they didn't really eat together either. כיוון שנתוועדו לזמן, but since they got together to do zimun, אינם רשאים לחלק, they're not allowed to divide anymore, to separate, או על כן צריכים לאכול ביחד, therefore they should eat together, right, since they got together, דחל זימון עליו, because now they have the obligation of zimun on them, ושוב אינם רשאים לחלק, and they're not allowed to divide. So according to this, like what we're saying is like this, that even, the fact that they got together, but they have not eaten yet, but they're planning to eat there, that already makes them obligated to stay together until the end, until they do zimun. Okay, that's hey. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch and see what we got there. So it says Shulchan Aruch, שלושה שישבו לאכול וברכו ברכת המוציא. Let's say 3 people, right, got together to eat together, and they did המוציא. אפילו כל אחד אוכל מכיכרו, even though each one has his own portion, right, his own loaf of bread, whatever. אפילו לא אכל עדיין כזית פת, and even though they didn't eat yet כזית of bread, אינם רשאים לחלק, they cannot divide, they cannot separate. So basically, what do we see from there? That once they made hamotzi, they have to stay together. That's it. They got to stay together until they finish. But apparently, right, if they didn't start yet hamotzi, so then they're not obligated to do that. Let me just take a look at the Mishnah Berurah, what he says here. So he makes one point over here, Mishnah Berurah, which is that even if they're not going to finish at the same time, one wants to go like earlier, but nevertheless, since they already made hamotzi, they got together, they should do zimun. So we're going to talk, later about, something which is related to this, and I'll explain to you what I mean. For instance, let's say you have 3 people, right? And one of them, as we just said here, he wants to leave early, get out of there. He can't stay there too long. So, and the other ones are going to stay a little bit longer, for the meal. So what do you do with the zimun now? What's the plan over here? So the plan is like this, right? That they can make zimun, and once that guy leaves, right, he has to go. They can continue eating. They don't have to stop eating. They can continue until the end, right? And then they do Birkat Hamazon by themselves. They could do that. So this is the way to solve the problem, if some people have to leave. You do the zimun and then he leaves. Or they leave, whatever. Okay, great. So that's that. So maybe we can do one more. Let's see. So it says over here in Vav, ודע שרש"י פירש שלא אמרן אלא דלא יקדימו הנח לחברות שפירשו אלו מהם והזמון עליו דהנה כגון אם היו ארבעה בכל החבורה. So he says, Rashi says it only applies, this we just said, that those did not precede, those groups did not precede who separated Elu mehem be'ezmun elai when they did zimun to them on them for them. Tane kegon im ayu arba'a bechol chabura. For instance, he says, let's say each group has had four. Nishar bechol echad kedei zimun, and now there's enough people there to do zimun three, which is the minimum, as we said. והפורשים הללו היו צריכים לצאת, and these people, need to leave, the extra guys. לשוק, they need to go to the market. קודם שגמרו החבורות, before they finish סעודתם, before the groups finish their סעודה, אבל הזמון עליו דהנה כגון שנצטרפו אלו עמהם. So he says, but we can do zimun for them, and they, for instance, they combine these with them, לזימון, for זימון, כדאמין עליהם, like we said above, קוראים לו ומזמנין עליו, וברחו החבורות. So what happens? We call him, and we do zimun on them. וברחו החבורות and ואלו, and these groups blessed, ואלו לא היו שם, and these were not there, אלא כדי לברך, וברוך הוא, ועכשיו הם באים לברך. So before they were just there for the zimun, and now they're coming to do Birkat Hamazon. לא מזמנה דפרח מנהיו מחובת הזימון. So they cannot do zimun anymore because they already did it one time. ותו לא הדר עליו, and there's no more obligation for them to do zimun again. לכן כתוב בדברי הרמב"ם, this says in Rambam, פרק כן, כתב הראש, says the ראש, והקשה רבנו יהודה על זה. So this rabbi made a question here. So he says it's obvious שלא יזמנו עוד that shouldn't do another זימון, right? It's obvious. שהרי כל אחד ואחד יצא ידי זימון. כי he already did the זימון before, why is he going to do it again? עם חברתו, with his group, וגם לא שייך לומר על זה פרח זימון מניו. And also it's not relevant to say that the זימון flew away from them. שהרי זימון כבר, זימנו כבר, because they already did זימון, ולא פרח מהם, nothing flew away, they just did it already. אלא יצאו ידך זימון, it should say right that they fulfill the obligation of זימון. כמו האחרים, like others, והיח הצטרפו, so therefore how can they combine, ואומרו נברך, נדו נברך פעם אחרת, to do say again the זימון. ופירש הוא, דאלו החברות היו בכל אחד ארבעו. So he says, he explains that these groups, each one had like four people, ופירש אחד מהם, one of them left, from each group, because חבורה from each group, והצטרפו לחבורה אחרת, and they combined with another group, וזימנו השלושה הנשארים, so those three that were left over, when this guy left, right, they did zimun together, בהד כמה הזמון ליו, בדכתיו, and that which he said that they can do the zimun on them in their place, לא שהיו עמהם אלא אחי כמה, it doesn't mean that they were with them, rather it means to say that זימנו עליהם כאילו היו שם, they did zimun as if they were there, כי נשאר להם כדי זימון, because they have enough people to do zimun as it is. Parach zimun minayu. So the zimun flew away from them. Kivan de chaverehem zimnu, because their group already did zimun. Lashon azmun alayu eno more klal ala perush hazeh. So he says the way to, this language of azmun alayu, which means that they did zimun for them. Right? He says it doesn't really imply this language at all. This opinion. Umay sheksha Rabbi Yehuda the Milta the Pshita, and that which Rabbi Yehuda asked, right, that this is like obvious stuff. Who should always know or that they shouldn't do zimun again? It's obvious. Look, Asher, so it says that's not difficult. Why? Midi deravata kamashmanan. So it says, let me teach you like a novel idea here. Shafal pishachlu elu hashtosha biyachad. Even though these people ate together, גמרו סעודתם, and then they finished סעודה שהתחילו עם חבורתם, they began with their group, בלא נטילת ידיים, without washing their hands, ובלא המוציא, and also without המוציא. אפילו הכי אינם יכולים לזמן, they're still not able to do זימון, the פרח זימון מנהים, because the זימון flew away from them, אפילו על מה שאכלו, even regarding that which they ate, אחר מכן afterwards. כיוון דזימנו כבר על תחילת סעודה, because they already did זימון on the beginning of the סעודה, וכל אחד חוזר למקום שפסק. So each one will return to the place where he stopped. Okay. So we have a little bit left. Let's see if we can knock this off before we go. Rabbeinu Yonah katav shelinyan maseh. So says Rabbeinu Yonah, what do we practically do? Nirin divrei Rabbeinu Yehuda. So it says we should go like Rabbi Yehuda. Katav delefi zeh hu adin im ayu shlosha. According to this, he says the same would apply also if there was three b'chol chavra, which each group. Velach echad kodem shazimun, and each one left. Right, one of them left before the zimun. Uva acher ve'achal kazait v'nislef, and then somebody else came and combined with them and ate kazait. Im elu ashnaim, with these two people. Rishonim, the first ones, וזימנו שלושתן, and then they did zimun together. כיוון שכבר זימנו חברתם, since that group already did zimun, אף על פי שלא זימנו עמהם, even though they didn't do zimun with them, פרח זיmun ביניים, so then they lost zimun, they're done with it. ורשב"א, says רשב"א, כתב שרבנו היי, that this rabbi פירש שלושה שבאו בשלושה חברות. He explains like this, three people that came from three different groups, אינם רשאים לחלק, they're not allowed to divide, separate, מחברתם from their group, הראשונה, the first group, כי איך ידע לא לפקע תורת זימון מחברתם. In order that the zimun should not escape them, the mitzvah zimun. ואנו דאמר רב חסדא, that's what רב חסדא said, והוא שבאו משלושה חברות, that's when they came from three groups. שלושה בני אדם, three by three. כלומר, האילו באו מחבורה של ארבעה, because if they would have came from a group of four, they will be able to divide. Because you still have three people in the original group there. They can do that small, they can do zimun for themselves. According to this, he says, the Mishnah is saying like this: three that sat to eat, so they're not allowed to divide up, right? Even though it's going to combine with some other group. But now he's breaking this group, right? So that doesn't help you. Because he's losing the mitzvah zimun there. From the first group, he's making them lose it. That's what Rabbi says. They only taught this regarding what Elu Shlosha, if these three people went quickly, Shabal Mishlosha Chavrot, they came from three groups, Bezimun Yatzmam, and they did Zimun by themselves, Parach Zimun Mina Chavrot, Chavrot Arishonot. So now those first groups, they lost Zimun. Nirim Lefi Perush Zeh, Shehu Zal Gores. So it says, it seems that according to this Perush, right, that his text was Girsat Acheret, a different text there. They're not from our books. This is the text. Rabbi says, right, if they already did Zimun, they lost the mitzvah. Comes to teach you, Rabbi, even though we said above. Hanitlata the Karcherifta, these three people, right, that they had bread together. The Kadim Chad Minayu, and one of them preceded, Ubarich Ladate, and he did Birkat Hamazon by himself. Inhu Nafke Bezimun Dide. So they will, right, fulfill their obligation with his zimun. In other words, as we said, right, even though he's leaving, he can do the zimun, and they're all three of them will combine there. דווקא כשלא יצא זה השלישי ידי זימון. That's only the third person didn't do זימון yet. אבל הכא דנפקא ידי זימון. But if they ever did זימון, פרח זימון מנהיו, they lost the זימון, that's it, right, it's gone. עד כאן. אבל בספרים שלנו גרסינן, but it says in our books, the text is, אמר רבא, לא אמרן אלא, דלא אזמין עליו. That's only if they didn't do זימון on them. בדוקצאי in their place. אבל אזמין עליו בדוקצאי, but if they're doing זימון in their place for them, פרח, Zimun minayu, then the zimun is lost. Katav Rabbeinu Yonah, says Rabbeinu Yonah, dehechad the azmun alayu, that when they did zimun, afilu achlu achar kach, even though they afterwards they ate, kol echad ve'echad pagu ze b'zeh, and they met up with each other. Achar she'achlu, even after they ate, enam mezamin ho'il, they don't do zimun anymore. But lo no'adu yachad, because they weren't really together as a group. Lechol upashut hu. So that's obvious. Okay, that's the end of it. So we're done with this bit Yosef here. I read a little bit quickly, but let's see if we can put it together. Otherwise, we'll have to review it maybe. If we can't put it together. This is a little bit tricky, right? This one. It's like, okay, so Gimel Shabbat, Megimel Chavrot, right? So what are we talking about here? Three people that came from three different groups. They separate from the original group, and they made a new group. Right? And each one is three people. Now they got together three people. Right? If they did zimun in their place, כגון שהפסיקו כל אחד לשניים עד שאמרו זזן. Like for instance, let's say two each one, right, divided into two, and they said hazan or called hazan. שוב אינם יכולים לזמן, so they cannot do zimun anymore. אפילו אכלו אחר כך יחד, even though they ate afterwards together, בגמור so that they finished the meal. ואם לא זימנו עליהם במקומם, but if they didn't do zimun in their place yet, חייבים לזמן, then they are obligated to zimun. ואינם רשאים לחלק, they cannot divide up anymore, they cannot separate anymore. אפילו אם לא אכלו אלא גימל ביחד, even though, right, it was only three people together, they ate. מי שנתחברו, when they got together. Okay, I'm going to read this one more time. A little bit tricky, at least for me. I don't know about you guys, but I'm a little bit confused here. So I'll read it one more time. Okay, so let's try one time. So it says, Gimel Shabal Megimel Chavrot, right? Again, we have three people got together, came together, and each one of them came from a group. They separated from a group, right? So each one of those groups was also three people. So what does that mean? When they left, now there's only two left over in those old groups. But now they got together, these three, right? Made a new group. אם זימנו עליהם במקומם כגון שהפסיקו. So he says, if they made zimun on them in their place where they separated there, כל אחד לשניים עד שאמרו azan, until they did zan, right? So in other words, let's explain this, right? If they already did zimun in the first group, when this guy left, right? As he was leaving, they said, you know what? Let's do zimun before you go, right? So if that's the case, that's it. They've already done zimun, these guys. So they don't do like a new zimun with a new group. Because they already did it. That's it. They fulfilled their obligation. So, fine. שוב אינם יכולים לזמן, ואפילו אכלו אחר כך יחד, כי הם גמרו סעודתם. Look what he says, right? Even if afterwards, right, they ate afterwards also, you know? And they finished the meal. This is exactly what I told you guys. Even though they continue eating, but the zimun they did, you know, that's it. They're done with the zimun. ואם לא זימנו עליהם במקומם, but if they didn't do zimun in that original group, right? Now these guys have to do zimun together in the new group, right? That's what we're saying. And we're not allowed to divide up there, right? To separate. That new group has to stay together until they do zimun. Even though, right, even though these three people, listen to this now, right? These three people that got together, they didn't eat anything together. So they only ate in the old group. But in the new group, they didn't eat at all. Right? But the thing is, since they already became obligated to do zimun in the old group, and they didn't do it there, right? So now in the new group, they have to do it. Even though with the new group, they're not eating nothing. You guys following me? A little tricky there. Good? Okay. All right. I'm glad somebody's got it. Okay. So thank you for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. B'ezras Hashem, we'll see you tomorrow. Laila Tov, Chodesh Tov, Rosh Chodesh Shevat. Tonight, B'ezras Hashem. So we'll see you tomorrow. Chazak u'baruch. Laila Tov.
Kavod Harav, thank you so much.
All the best. God bless.
Tov.
Thank you, Rabbi.
God bless.